Before we begin, I would also like to add a trigger warning for anyone who is sensitive to certain topics. Please take care when you're watching this video. Pause it, take a breath if you need to, or we will add timestamps so that you can skip around and skip over the parts that you may not be comfortable hearing or watching.
I could never go back. I came from that place where I sat around the table with other leaders, knowing how do we emotionally manipulate people to get them to stay. Family members even, talking about their own family. I have seen how deeply entrenched everything that love is hangs on the balance of your worthiness to the church in Mormonism.
Hey, my name is Shelise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. As always, if you're only listening and you want to see our faces, go to my YouTube channel at Cults to Consciousness. You can like, you can subscribe, become a supporter of these amazing people coming on to tell their stories, and you can leave a comment. It helps the algorithm, it helps support our guests, and I just love reading them. So today's guest, she was sent to me by one of you on Instagram. They said, hey, you got to check out this girl. She's talking about her Mormon past. She did this whole series on her Instagram, and I went and checked it out. Wow, guys, it's quite the story. I cannot wait to get into it. We're going to be talking about mental health when leaving a high-demand group or cult. We're going to be talking about manipulation tactics, and we're going to be talking about how she was able to use music to heal and to express herself. And she's this incredible musician, and I can't wait to get into her story. Thank you so much for joining us, Irene.
Hi, nice to be here. Shelise, thank you so much for having me on. I had like 3 or 4 people tag me throughout my series. Cults to Consciousness,
really?
You have to check them out. So I was aware of you earlier on, I think around part 3 or 4 of the 18-part series.
That's so cool.
So it's cool to finally be connecting.
Yeah, and I love hearing suggestions from people because it's like the people have spoken. They want more of this. They want more of you. They want to hear what I have to say about your story. And so I love that we're able to connect. And yeah, thanks guys for sending me your suggestions and for reaching out. So Irene, you have a band right now called Irene's Entropy, and it's so awesome, the music that you've been able to produce. I'm like starting at the end here. I just love the person that you've become and how you've been able to just share yourself through your music.
Thank you. It's been a lot of hard work. So when I get compliments like that, I don't take it lightly. I've had to work really hard to get to the point where I can sit here and not just talk about my past, but also the path to becoming in my view, a successful musician and woman just out in the world.
Yeah.
So my band is Irene's Entropy. And for those of you that have been following along with the series, you'll know that Irene was not the name I was born with. It was my Mormon Temple name.
Yes.
But I've taken it and used it along my journey. And entropy is a engineering term. It's the second law of thermodynamics. And entropy is essentially a disorder of energy, constantly moving forward. And I thought that that was a beautiful way to describe what was going on in my mind, all of this disordered energy and chaos as I was trying to navigate leaving Mormonism and an entire paradigm shift. But I only had one option, and that was to keep moving forward. And so this expansion of my mind, I thought, was captured so beautifully in this word entropy as I was studying for my engineering degree. So Irene's Entropy is the name, and that's why I chose the name. But the music has just been an incredible experience, which we'll probably get into that a bit later.
Yeah. And for those of you who aren't aware, so in Mormonism, when you go to the temple and you take out endowments is what they call it. It's this very super sacred ordinance thing that you can only get when you're worthy enough, when you're old enough, if you get married or you go on a mission. So Irene here went on a mission and she got her endowments, and they give you your temple name, and it's supposed to be like your real name, right? Like the name that God wants you to have. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, it's a token. So you receive the signs and the tokens that when you get to the veil of heaven, your name is your last token to cross the threshold of heaven's door, basically. Right. And I took that really serious. I remember when I first got the name Irene, I was so disappointed because I thought it was like a grandma name.
Yeah.
But then I remembered, side note, I remembered that Sherlock Holmes, that his lover was named Irene. And I was like, okay, I could make Irene work.
Yeah.
I can be like a beautiful Irene. I never in my wildest dreams would have thought I would make Irene the empowered woman that I am today.
Yes.
But I remember first receiving it very vividly. Do you want to talk about the temple experience? I'm sure you've talked about that on the podcast before.
No. I think we could, because I think it's really relevant to know why it's such a big deal that you're calling yourself Irene's Entropy, because it is like, in Mormon terms, it's the most blasphemous thing that you could do. And I love it. I love that you just took back the power of it. So yes, please.
It's very scarlet letter.
Yes.
Very, very scarlet letter. And where to begin? I was 19, so I had decided to serve a mission for the church because that's everything I ever dreamed of since being a little girl. We probably don't have to go into all of the manipulation tactics on children, but growing up, it is so manipulative, the way that the church breeds you to literally, you want your mission more than anything else. Your mission is the most important step to becoming an adult. So when I went to the temple, I didn't have any of the temple training necessarily. I knew that my parents wore the garments, but when you go in, I thought I was going to be learning literally the secrets of God and learning things that would just send me to like another level of knowledge. But when you get in there, it's secret handshakes, signs, tokens, chanting. You know, everyone's like, oh God, hear the words of my mouth. And you're in this weird clothing, robes and sashes and veils. And in the beginning, you're anointed with the oil and the water and you get a new name. And before they begin the ceremony, they ask you, if you have forgotten your name, you know, please exit the room and go get your name. Mm-hmm. So you know it's important from the get-go. I'm going to stick with the name being the most important thing throughout the temple ceremony, because as I was going through this experience, to me, it was Irene, it was my holy self that was really participating in this. And by the time you get to the end, which is like 2 hours of one, being pretty demeaned as a woman, which I was used to my entire life, right? But they separate the men and the women. And I know that they have since changed it like a couple years ago. But when I went through the temple, it was still the women had to promise to be obedient to their husbands. Mm-hmm. Whenever there was a secret order of prayer and everyone had to cross their arms and give secret signs while they were chanting and saying the things in a circle for the prayer, the women had to veil their faces because we weren't worthy to have our faces showing when talking to God. It had to be the priesthood holders. And so you're going through this whole process. And that really was the birth of that identity for me. And you get to the end and there's this veil, this large curtain with the secret symbols cut into it, and a hand reaches through and you have to take hold of the hand and give it all of the secret handshakes, and they'll ask you questions. And if you answer all of them correctly, they'll part the veil and they'll let you into the celestial kingdom. Mm-hmm. And this is symbolic, but it's also very real. Like, this is how Mormons believe they enter heaven. Mm-hmm. The importance of that name. That name is that's the last token that gets you into heaven. And it's that name that represents your purest form of self. And as a woman, I was never allowed to say that name to anyone. No one could ever know besides my future husband, because it's your husband that will call you forth, because he commands you. I covenanted to be obedient to my husband. So the name itself was just born in these patriarchal chains of obedience and shame and guilt. There was so much shame and guilt wrapped around the temple in general, because if you did anything where you weren't worthy to go and you stepped inside and you just felt so terrible and like you weren't living up to the name. I don't know if you ever had any experiences like that with shame and guilt around.
Oh, many.
Yeah.
Many.
Would you like to share?
I mean, I've talked about it a little bit. I think I was never worthy enough or old enough or didn't go on a mission, didn't get married young. So I didn't ever do the endowment ceremony, which is the main one that you're speaking of right now. Mm-hmm. I did baptisms for the dead. And I also went and saw my half sister, my mom's stepdaughter, get sealed to our family. So that was kind of like an endowment ceremony where I saw everyone in the weird get up and I was like, what is going on? Yeah. So I do remember though, when our young women's, the group of young women, they separate them, and I talk about it a lot, but I forget sometimes people don't see all the episodes that I put out, so I just have to explain certain things. So for the young women's activity, we were going to do baptisms for the dead at one of the temples, and that meant that we all had to do a bishop's interview to make sure we were worthy enough to go. And guys, we're like 12, 13, 14, 15. Like, why would we not be worthy to go to the temple? Like, it's really frustrating. And most of it's sexual sin, because what else are you doing at that age? And I remember feeling so anxious. And even I think the first time I went, I was probably 12, and I was so excited because that's the first time that you're allowed to go to the temple to do baptisms. And also, we're not baptizing dead bodies. Like, we're the proxy for the dead people, and they just like dunk you over and over and say the person's name as if it's you. Anyway, it's very weird. So I remember being so terrified to go in for that bishop's interview, even though I didn't even know what sex was. I didn't have a boyfriend. Boys were gross to me at that time. And I was still terrified to make sure that I was worthy enough to go. And then by the time I did have a boyfriend and I was like, making out with him, I remember being so scared to go in and tell that bishop. And I was just like, I was making out with him and I laid on top of him and that's it. And I was trembling. I couldn't speak. And luckily I had a nice bishop and he was like, Shelise, you are more than worthy to go to the temple. And I was like, oh, God. Yeah. I was so relieved, because if he says no, I can't go with my friends and they all know that I'm a sinner.
Yeah. And while we look back, because I have many stories like that, which I will get into going all the way up to my mission. But, you look back and it's kind of funny because, we were so young and, this was a part of my life. I can't believe I did that. But the seriousness of that from such a young age, 12 years old, 8 years old, when you're first getting baptized, that your entire future hangs on the words of some random priesthood holder who you don't know if he's sexually getting off on asking these young children these questions.
Yep.
You have no idea. But from quite the young age, we were trained to let our destiny be determined by a random priesthood holder across the desk from us, telling us that we were worthy enough to go or we weren't worthy enough to go. How many times did I cry myself to sleep? Did I pray for hours at a time? Did I was quite physical when I was younger. I so wanted to be so close to God that I took literally godly sorrow. And it would have been normal for me to have, in the repentance process, physically abuse myself. Not in a like I would run until I puked. I would read scriptures and stay up all night. I would, pray until I would like passed out. I would lay in the rain just praying for pneumonia sometimes, as dramatic as that is. Like I so wanted to prove in my repentance process that I truly was changing. And oftentimes all of this leading up to the courage to let myself walk through the bishop's door, sit down, and tell him, I've touched myself.
Yeah.
I was 15 or 16 years old before I even knew that a woman could orgasm.
Oh, same.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to be now that old, and you're just now discovering that your body can do something, and then to have a bishop question you about it, and you think that your worthiness as a woman depends on this man telling you you are touching yourself correctly or incorrectly, or you're letting others touch you correctly or incorrectly. It's just, that's just a realization for me right now, that just from a very young age, we were taught that our entire existence depended on a man across the table telling us.
Bishop of the Year. Just as a random guy. I have to make sure people understand that this is not someone who even trained to be in this position. He's not a preacher. In fact, we don't have preachers.
Nope.
The congregation is the one that gets up every Sunday and gives talks. Like, you're assigned to get up and give a talk is what they would call it. I mean, we would have general authorities, the higher ups, give talks twice a year at what they call general conference. But other than that, there are no preachers who understand even the depths of the church. Like, they're calling guys that are just your everyday guy next door. Like, he could be your neighbor, he could be your best friend's dad, he could be your plumber, your dentist, and you have to sit across from this man and tell him all of your deep, dark, dirty secrets. And it's so embarrassing. It's just, I wish I could describe the amount of shame, because a lot of people, when I tell this, and the people who I forget don't know that this is a thing in Mormonism, when they ask me, why did you leave? I'm like, well, because I had to talk to my bishop about giving my boyfriend a blowjob. And they're like, wait, why did your bishop need to know that? And they are just beside themselves. And I'm like, right, that is really weird. But what Irene and I are trying to talk about is when you are programmed that this is how life works, you don't question it, number one. You don't want to do it. You feel absolutely uncomfortable and disgusting and ashamed, but that's just what you do. And so the cognitive dissonance there, where you're trying to stand up for yourself and be like, I don't need to tell this guy anything. And let's say that you don't and you leave because people will be like, well, just lie. No, my friends. That is the worst thing that you could do, because you're going to leave feeling so guilty that you just lied to basically the Lord, and you were trying to get these special privileges, or you're just trying to like get around the fate of your salvation. It is even worse.
Yeah. And let's hang on that for a moment, because I know that one of our goals is throughout this podcast to talk about mental health.
Yes.
And I would start with that if you're watching this and you have been through a traumatic religious experience, start from the beginning. At what point in your life did you start thinking, my worthiness, my identity, everything about me is wrapped up in the opinion or the authority of someone that's sitting across from me at the table, someone that's telling me that I am worthy. Mm-hmm. And I think for us, that started very young in our interviews. And also, one of the things that I struggle with now is oversharing. I've gotten a lot better at it, especially in my professional career, as I have distanced myself from my past and the church. But when we went into interviews, one of the questions is, are you honest in all of your dealings? And that went further into, are you telling me all the truth? That is where my oversharing started. uncontrollable urge to just spill everything, spill my guts to the bishop. Because if I left anything off the table, I might not be fully forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
But that is such a dangerous thing later on, or just an immature thing. If I'm sitting with someone, in a professional conversation at work, or just talking to someone when I'm out at the bar or having a drink, it makes us, especially as women, so vulnerable because we feel like we have to overshare every single detail with strangers because we were conditioned to do that from a young age.
Wow. That is such a good point.
Yeah.
My mind is a little bit blown right now because I'm just thinking back to all of the times in my life that I've completely overshared and people are like, wow, you're so open. You just like put everything on the table like that. And I'm just like, why? What? Like, it didn't make sense for me not to. And you're just blowing my mind. That makes so much sense.
And I think that, I always thought that too. Oh, everyone would say, you're so open with your feelings and everything. But is it truly being open if you don't have a choice? That takes away the vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because we were never trained to know what is something that is personal, private. Also, from a very young age, we did not know what boundaries were.
Mm-hmm.
No concept of what a healthy boundary was, which is why it's so hard for us to leave. All of a sudden, you're being presented with all of these ties of, oh, but we're your family. Oh, and we're this, and you made these covenants, and don't you love us? And you have no idea how to respond to that because you've never known how to set up a boundary.
Yeah.
You've only known how to overshare personal information, your feelings. And yeah, I'll just stop there so that I don't go on a rant. But
no, feel free.
If that is something that you as a listener are struggling with, please know that it just takes time and practice. And once you can start learning to not overshare your life, know what's personal, and know when it's appropriate to be vulnerable. And I found that through music. But I think that that's a really important line that I know I had to learn. And perhaps it is true with you or our listeners.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing I want to add to that list is forgiveness. Is you're taught that no matter what happens, as long as they've been forgiven by the church, you're supposed to let it go. And if you don't let it go, you're the problem and you need to practice forgiveness. So you're not ever allowed to work through issues. You're not allowed to be angry. You're not allowed to really just figure out how you feel about something if the church has forgiven that person for whatever it is they've done to you. And that's really damaging and really toxic.
Yeah. And if I could carry on with that, I do think that another crucial part to understanding my mental health, or I say our, because I know that you were also an ex-Mormon, but a crucial part to understanding the journey of our own mental health is that we were not allowed to experience feelings in their fullness. Mostly it was, you will either feel shame or guilt, or you will feel immense joy, because when you're in sacrament meeting, testimony meeting, for those of you that don't know, Mormons met once a month. I mean, every Sunday, but the first Sunday of every month was fast and testimony meeting. So you fast, pay money to the church, and then there is an hour-long meeting where people just get to go up to the stand and say, I'd like to bear my testimony. I know this is the truth. I know Joseph Smith was a prophet of God.
Yeah.
I know the Book of Mormon is true. Fill in the rest with just propaganda. But often people would tell stories and they start crying, and everyone else in the room starts crying, and you feel the spirit, and you're told that that's an emotion of God.
Yeah.
That's an emotion that you know it's truth. And from there, our our feelings started to be manipulated, where you're either feeling these highs and lows of this shame and guilt and you need to go repent, or you're up here and you're feeling that spirit and you're just overwhelmed with the joy. And because we were kind of trained to be in this place or this place, we missed all of the feelings in between. We weren't allowed to feel anger, which I think is a huge part of my healing. For the longest time, even when I left Mormonism, I couldn't get angry. It was, I have to do this for my own mental health, but but I'm not angry. I know that they mean well. I know that they mean well. And understanding that anger is a good thing to have. Maya Angelou said that bitterness is a cancer. Bitterness will eat you alive from the inside, but anger is a gift. Anger is what makes us march in the streets. It's what makes us dance and sing and write poetry. Anything in history that happened artistically or a movement that we love is because someone got angry and wanted to make change. You cannot make change in your life, at least with something as large as your identity, in my personal experience, unless you get angry and channel that anger into healthy movements towards change. You're not going anywhere. And it took me at least a year or two to start understanding that. And that's when I really started to see changes within myself. But the conditioning of feelings and emotions also started very young for us, which brings me back to what you were saying.
Yeah. And I don't know why I completely forgot about this, maybe because I blocked it out. But in a previous episode, like not that long ago, I just told a guest that I don't think Mormons don't let you feel anger. And I think that is completely untrue because you just said it and I was like, wait, yeah, they don't let you be angry because it's just a layer of toxic positivity. They're like, don't be upset, just forgive the person, or don't be upset, you just need to pray more, or whatever it is. And it's so true. And I don't think, maybe it didn't resonate or click with me until now, because now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't get angry about the church or at the church until 10 years later.
Yeah.
When I really started looking into stuff again. And I was like, you know what? Because I was going to write a book, or I am writing a book about my story. And I was like, I need to make sure I get this Mormon stuff right before I go ranting on about it. I knew nothing about Mormonism until I started researching it as an ex-Mormon. And I would be angry all of the time. I was like, I was supposed to believe that? That's incredibly racist. I was supposed to follow that guy? He was straight up murdering people. And so the anger came so much later. And I think that's also something to mention when it comes to mental health, is sometimes when you're conditioned to act and feel a certain way, literally emotion control, sometimes it takes a while for that to come back online. And sometimes it'll come in a flood and it's hard to deal with, but just know that you can work through it.
Yes. I think that translates also into our life, even after you have left a high demand religion, or just, and I am crafting my identity and my story to not just be about religion. My story starts with religion, but really it's trauma we're talking about. Mm-hmm. We're talking about tools that are used to instill trauma in our lives. And for me, that was Mormonism as a child. But if you're listening to this and you don't come from some high demand religion, you easily could have come from some other sort of trauma. And all of these things relate to what you might be feeling or what you might need to do as you are moving on, having a paradigm shift, trying to help change your identity and be a better person. So putting that out there, I think that for me, discovering anger, and something I'm still working on, because even now, I want everything to be okay. I want everyone to be happy. We all are just, comes from this. We're all the celestial family. We all are going to walk into church and everyone's going to look great. I know that mom and dad just had a fight in the kitchen this morning, but my God, we're walking into church. We're sitting in that pew and like, we're perfect.
Yeah.
And that extends to outside of religion. That happens to everyone. But it denies us of the ability to be authentic with ourselves and understand what's going on around us. My husband, who I lovingly refer to as the Ecologist, if you watch my 18-part series on my Instagram and I tell my story, he was called the Ecologist, and that just stuck. And everyone in my fan base, followers, calls him that now. So when I refer to the Ecologist, that's my husband. But when I'm talking to the Ecologist, and he might be telling me something very seriously about, hey, I recognize that you just did this, and I don't think that that's healthy, or this is a pattern, or why didn't you do this? And I will have a tendency to snap back and say something very defensive because, one, let's talk about ego later on. I'm going to write this down. Let's talk about ego leaving the church. Narcissism, egotistical maniacs, that's what we were raised with in the church. And so ego is a huge battle to tackle. So, but defensiveness is something that I struggle with. But also, if someone, including my husband or somebody else, has a point to say and they raise their voice even just a little bit, I am conditioned to be like, no, you're fine. Everything's fine. Don't say that. How dare you say that? No, like I lose my cool because I'm conditioned to want everything to be at this perfect level of happy, normal. And that learning to accept within myself that anger is okay, but also learning to accept that it's okay if other people are angry or upset in any way. That doesn't mean that they're angry at you. It often means that they're angry and have some internal struggle going on as they are trying to get something out or figure something out about themselves. Because I have the tendency to think that they're just talking at me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that also extends into the ego conversation. Was there anything you wanted to say, or we can move on into that?
I mean, I'm just loving this conversation, and we've barely even talked about your story. I feel like the work that you've done to deprogram and to introspect, and your amazing husband is just so awesome, and all of these little gold nuggets that you're giving me in the audience are brilliant. I do want to get into your story. Okay. We could probably talk for like 8 hours, and we'll probably have to at some point. So I'd like for the audience to get a better sense of who your family is, because they're going to be a huge part of your deconstruction process. So if you want to give us like a few little things of how your family was when you were growing up, and maybe the stresses or the pressures that they put on you to do certain things, and then we can get into your mission.
Yeah, that is a perfect storyline. I'll start there. My family does not come from pioneer heritage in the Mormon church. My grandmother converted to Mormonism, and therefore my father was baptized when he was about 12 or 13. And my mother was not born Mormon. However, I do strongly believe that both of my parents, especially my mother, did come from histories of trauma, like within the family. My mom grew up in a very religious home. She was an army brat. They moved around a lot, and she was always in some sort of religious setting, like convent style, growing up in communities, and never had much of there was no education. And so she left at 18 and married my father, who was 19. He was in the Navy, and they got married young. And my mother did not join the church for 11 years. Wow. She was very stubborn because of her own religious upbringing, that she was not going to conform.
Uh-huh.
And then they had children. And I can imagine it went somewhat of a guilt trip of, well, we need to raise our children together in the same religion. And so you need to do this. So my mother did convert, and I have 4 other siblings. So we were raised in a picturesque Mormon home of family study, scripture, always going to church activities. I, from a very young age, was aware that there was trauma in my home, the way that my father treated my mother. I was given the title of peacemaker very young.
Oh.
And looking back and understanding that now, I understand that peacemaker does not necessarily mean that, oh, you're just the more sensitive one. You're sensitive, but you're often sensitive to the trauma going on around you. And I was always the one that was writing notes and leaving them for people so that they could, soften their heart. And then maybe dad wouldn't be mad when he got home, or mom might feel better about herself when something mean was said to her, or I was very aware from a young age of how feelings worked and how people manipulated each other's feelings. And I remember being very young, and there was a movie or something on, and there was something violent or some sort of sexual scene maybe. But I ran out of the room, and I remember my mom coming to get me. And she said, "Oh, Irene," and I use my name Irene. That's what I refer to myself as now. But, "Oh, Irene, I totally understand. You're perfect. You're beautiful. It's just because you are so sensitive to the spirit. And that's something very special about you that other little kids don't have. You're very sensitive to the spirit." And that's a core memory of mine.
Wow.
Because from a very young age, I knew that it was my role to be sensitive to the spirit and to be an example for others, and to be the one that stands up and says, no, this is what the spirit is telling me to do. And that was a core part of my identity growing up.
And real quick to add to that, another reason why that's so important in Mormon context is because when you're 8 years old and you're baptized, you are given the gift of the Holy Ghost, which is also the Spirit. And they tell you things like, if you do something wrong, the Spirit goes away and it's gone from you. If you leave the church, you lose the Spirit. If someone is sinning, you can see the Spirit leaving them. And they create this thing where you inherently judge people. You have this righteous judgment. We talked in one of my previous episodes about BYU, and her roommate, she was sitting there with the guest who I had on, Kirsten, and someone who had left BYU because they were gay and they didn't want to get kicked out for being gay. They were all sitting having a great conversation. And when the guy left, the roommate said, "Oh, wow, did you feel the spirit just leave the room?" And Kirsten was like, "No," but they use that as a tool to cause you to judge other people and judge yourself. And so just like you were talking about earlier, Irene, when they monopolize your emotions and you know that feeling good and happy is the spirit and feeling sad and bad is the absence of the spirit, it can wreak havoc on your mind, because anytime you feel slightly unhappy, you think it's because you've done something wrong and the Spirit of God has left you.
Exactly, Shelise. Thank you for saying that, because that's a huge part of my identity, is that when I talk about how seriously I pursued being a good, upstanding member of the church, almost like trying to be just a poster child, gold 5-star woman of the church, is because I felt that I carried with me this obligation to be a person that constantly had the spirit to help others. But with that, from a very young age, you have these two extremes of, like you said, often with the spirit, you are either judging other people for having or not having the Spirit, or you're internally judging yourself, mostly with hate, shame, and guilt for lack of the Spirit. And so from a very young age, it was before I was baptized. So I'm probably 7. This is also around the time I started being sexually abused by a priesthood holder in the church. But I remember going behind, my father had this like armchair, and I remember going behind it, and I remember praying because I knew the magnitude of what happened when I got baptized, that I was now responsible for my sins. And I remember sitting behind the chair praying that, because there were 2 options. Either I had this magnitude of a burden with my life after I got baptized, or 1, Jesus could come, because if the second coming happens, I am no longer responsible. We've entered a new age.
Yeah, the millennium.
and everything's fine. The millennium. Yep. So either the millennium happens or I die. If I die, that's a free ride to heaven. And so I was very aware from a young age that I think most other kids were not. That 1, again, I had this duty to uphold. 2, if I didn't uphold that duty of having the Spirit with me and being righteous, there were serious repercussions. And so to the point that I thought of my own death before I even turned 8.
Yeah.
That's the seriousness of all of this going forward. So if you can just picture that, my middle school and high school life had moments where I kind of saw around the cognitive dissonance, and I was like, I don't want this. I don't like this. I tried to leave when I was 13. I told my parents that I didn't want to be a good little Mormon girl anymore. And that was received very harshly. I was grounded for an entire summer. I was put into the garage and had to scrape beehives. I was cut off contact from all of my friends, couldn't call anyone, couldn't go anywhere. And I also credit that summer with the music that I discovered rock and roll that summer in the garage. And so while that is a core memory, again, for me in the forming of my identity, here I am keenly aware of everything going on around me from a family perspective, and also from the magnitude of the church perspective with the shame and guilt. And when I finally raised a voice against it in rebellion, I was shut away and couldn't talk to anyone and had no contact. And so this message is sent through of, you either take on and fulfill this role, or you are not just not worthy, but you're nothing, and you will just feel punished and shame and guilt. And so that was a core memory for me. And then going into high school, I really took on that role of just being a righteous soldier for the Lord. And you talk about church history. I mean, my New Year's resolutions and goals, everyone else is like, oh, I don't know, what do normal teenagers think about for their New Year's resolutions? But
get a new boyfriend.
Yeah, get a new boyfriend, go to track state or basketball, whatever. And mine were read every single general conference talk since 1920, or
wow.
I would set Jeffrey R. Holland's voice as the ringtone on my phone. So when anyone texted me, I would hear his voice. I would put posters in my locker of the second coming. I would write church quotes on everything from apostles and prophets. I studied all of the church history. Like, nothing fazed me. When I left the church, it wasn't because of historical issues. And going into BYU, I took Joseph Smith and the Everlasting Gospel, Jesus Christ and the Restoration, and all of the classes. And I studied that curriculum. I knew the history. I just had developed a very strong mental gymnastics approach in my mind of eating up anything the church told me. Oh, polygamy? I had my battle with that. I prayed about polygamy. My first battle with that was at 11 years old. Most people aren't even thinking about that until you're an adult. But I remember struggling and praying and crying in my bedroom, just beating my head against the wall, figuratively, over and over again. This can't be true. Joseph Smith can't be a prophet because no one would ever do this that was a prophet. Please, God, tell me it's not true or tell me it is. But there was only one answer. There was only one answer for my little 11-year-old mind. I'm in 5th grade. And I just remember mentally exhausting myself until I felt nothing. And then I felt the Spirit tell me that, oh, it is true. It'll all work out. Polygamy is just fine. And you take that experience, but apply it to the rest of my life. That is often what I had to do to get to the point of, oh, I feel the Spirit and this is all good, was mentally and sometimes literally beating myself against these walls until finally I felt nothing. And then when I felt nothing, there was the gospel and the Mormon church to pick me up, and I would know that it was true.
Oh, it's so much, and it's heartbreaking and it's exhausting. And I love how beautifully you just described that, because again, we just kind of had a conversation like this with someone from a Korean cult, and she was trying to describe the cognitive dissonance, and people always say, how could you fall for that? How could you fall for that? And it's like the thing that drives me the most crazy, because it's not that simple. You don't just automatically accept it because your brain doesn't want to. But when you are so enveloped in this particular group, when your parents believe it, when your friends believe it, and you're the only one that's struggling, you get to that point of complete numbness. And you fight and you fight and you fight with yourself, like you said, until you can't feel anything. And then your body just wants so badly to be okay that you just accept it.
Yep.
Because the alternative is way worse. And we'll talk about that when we get to your deconstruction story. But there's no possible way, especially as a young child, when you're so enveloped in that world, how could you possibly go to your parents and be like, yeah, this doesn't feel good and I'm out? Like it's not an option for people.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And there are so many triggers, like you said, this woman that you had on, I saw a bit of her story on your podcast, and it gets to the point where there are physical triggers. Like for me, falling asleep, not to the level of narcolepsy, but the trigger of when you get to that point of just mentally, you can't handle it anymore, boom, I'd fall asleep. I'd just be out. And I still carry that with me. A lot of times, if I'm having any sort of argument with my husband, and it could be like a productive argument, but if it's something that I'm really trying and my brain's going and I just want to fall asleep,
wow.
I'll just collapse. And that's something that I've gotten better at as I've been healing. But your brain, your body has these mental shutdown triggers. And yeah, so that's a real thing. That's what I took into high school and into college, was this fierce warrior mentality of being everything for the church, knowing everything about the church. Let's take it back down a notch, because while it's difficult to admit out loud, it is a truth. Part of it was just my obsessive ego with myself, because I wanted to be seen as this spiritual warrior, because women were not spiritual warriors in the church. They say they are, and they're mothers and raise your children, but it's the men.
Mm-hmm.
It's the men that you want to watch give the talks at General Conference, the prophets and the apostles. When a woman comes on the stand, you're like, oh, okay. it's like a bone being tossed to them in a way, culturally. And women don't have the priesthood, but the men do. The men can work the miracles. And I think that from a young age, I felt so slighted by that, because here I am being so young and told that I'm so spiritually strong and a warrior. But at the end of the day, it's not me that gets to stand at the front of the battle lines. It has to be a man. And I think I hated that. And that became a part of my personality. I was very, I was not feminine in any way. Like I played rugby when I went to BYU. I had a motorcycle. I hated the identity of all the women at BYU. I just despised it, because to me, it was weakness. And so I tried. It's such a complicated thing. Here I was trying to be literally the most studious, righteous person ever and an example, but also wanted to be nothing like the other women in the church. I wanted to be like the men.
But it actually makes complete sense, because you wanted to be the most righteous. And as you just mentioned, women never hold that position. It's always the men. So for those who aren't familiar, men have the power of God. That's what holding the priesthood means. If you are worthy by the age of 12, you hold the power of God, and women will never have that, because they say, well, your job is to birth children. And that's amazing. Well, obviously, but it'll never measure up to holding the priesthood, to a position where they tell you you can lay your hands on someone and heal them of cancer, which is not true. So they give men all of this authority and all of this power. And for you are learning more than all of these men, most likely. You know all of the ins and outs of Mormonism. You want to be the most righteous, and you literally can't be unless you're a man. So it makes sense that you would want to conform to that sort of presentation, even though that's the opposite of what the church wants you to do.
Yep. And that just goes on steroids, like in my mission, because now, going from BYU into my mission, I was called to serve as a missionary for the Mormon church in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, which is a very dangerous place in Central America. I was thrilled, to say the least, thrilled whenever I was called there. Most people are if you get called outside of the US, because I think secretly we know that the cognitive dissonance and the walls we'll need to bang our heads against in the United States is so much harder than if you get to go off to a third world country where it looks like maybe you're actually doing something good or something nice is a thing. I remember having nightmares that I got called to Wisconsin or Ohio, recurring
or Salt
like
Lake
every
City.
night. Oh God. So I was thrilled, and I was so prepared to just outwork everyone. I actually wrote on my mission papers, when you apply to serve your mission, you have to fill out all of your medical history and all of that stuff. And at the end, they say, is there anything you would like to tell the brethren? And I said, put me to work. I am an ox.
Wow.
That's what I wrote to the brethren. And I remember my mission president, I wasn't even on my mission yet, but my mission president and his wife emailed me, and she said, I just saw your application, and like just praises about, we're so ready to put you to work. We're so ready for you to get here. I can already tell you're going to be this outstanding leader type thing. And so there goes my ego. I'm going to go outwork everyone in the mission. And that's the mentality I went into my mission with. Let's pause and talk about the MTC for a little bit. The MTC is the Mission Training Center that you get sent to learn language if you're going to a foreign country, but also to basically be deprogrammed and reprogrammed. Looking back at the Mission Training Center, very similar to boot camp, but less physical and more mental. I think that the Mission Training Center is the first place where most kids, I think, have some experiences growing up of what we just talked about, the whole emotionally getting yourself to this point where then you feel nothing.
Yeah.
And then you feel uplifted by the church or by whoever your abuser is. That was the Mission Training Center on steroids. You're put through this rigorous schedule of classes and a foreign language, and you're told you're going to face all of these people that are going to tell you that you're evil or you're this, but you're a soldier for the Lord. And we're going to teach you all these classes where we'll replicate people asking questions about the gospel, and you'll have to teach them these lessons. There's 3 pamphlets. Pick pamphlet 1, 2, or 3. We're going to teach you how to manipulate people to know what pamphlet to use. That's a huge thing most people don't understand, is that it is so calculated. When you go into the Mission Training Center, like I said, they call them pamphlets 1, 2, 3, and then there are others after. But when you meet someone, you try to go for target words where you get a feeling of, oh, did they have someone die? Do they have children? You look for weaknesses and trauma in their life. And then you pick pamphlet 1, 2, or 3, and you go for it. And they have you fake knock on doors and do role playing with people so that you can learn basically how to manipulate them. Classic, and some of it is classic salesman stuff. If you're going to sell something, you need to know who you're talking to. But it goes so much deeper because you're talking about spirituality. You're talking about, oh, this woman's child died. So I will now, one, ask them personal questions to try to get there. But now I know that I need to choose lesson 2, plan of salvation. And then if I go at this angle, she'll get so emotionally wrapped up in it. She'll know that she can see her daughter again.
Yep.
That kind of manipulation. And let me take it a step further. You're also trained to write everything down about everyone. And they're called carpetas, like binders of information of people. They probably have iPads now, but you write all that down, their address, their name, everything you found out about them, because maybe 8 months later I'm gone, but another missionary comes. Oh, sister so-and-so, kid died. All right, let's go knock on the door. We'll talk about lesson 2. And you hear people talk, they're like, oh, it was a miracle. The missionaries knocked and they knew everything. They knew just what to say. Well, no, duh. Sharon or whoever. It's because it's calculated. Yeah. Everything about it is calculated. So, like I said, you're going through all of this training and also at the same time being made to feel as though you're nothing, you're spiritually worthless, and you need the power of God to help you. So at the end of the day, you're so drained. But then let's put all of these 18 and 19-year-old teenagers into a room, and then we're going to put on a big screen movie theater, and we're going to have the prophet or the apostle talk to you about how you're the warriors. You're the saviors of this generation. You were saved for this time. No one can do what you're doing. You have power. You have power and authority that we give to you, and no one else on earth at this time has it. Talk about, the emotional manipulation and levels that were reached in that room at the Mission Training Center is unlike any other thing I have felt. Like, I don't know if you ever went to an EFY.
No,
like
but we had a whole episode on it.
Oh, yeah. If it's like that, but on steroids. And while it is somewhat funny to look back at like, oh, church camps and all this stuff, well, it's very serious. You don't even realize that you are being emotionally manipulated and learning how to manipulate other people. Yeah. And you don't see anything wrong with it at all. It's normal. So I will move on unless you had a comment about that, but
please just keep going. What happens when you get to Honduras?
So the week before I left for Honduras, my mother wrote me a letter because when you're on a mission, I wasn't allowed to, I didn't have any sort of smartphone or technology, anything. It was like a track phone that I used to call my leaders every night to report my numbers and report where I was. But other than that, you're only receiving letters or emails 1 hour once a week. And my mother wrote me a letter before I left Mexico for Honduras. And in it, that's when she told me, like Esther, if you perish, you perish. and then went on to talk about how she would be proud of me. She would see me in the celestial kingdom. So what my mother doesn't know is that I had already had that thought 10 years prior.
Wow.
Sitting behind my father's chair, contemplating that my own death might be better than to keep living with the magnitude of having to tackle sin and life. And so now I'm about to go on my mission, and my mother tells me, "You're a soldier for the Lord. Go do it. If you die, I'm proud of you."
Oh, that's heavy.
And when I read it, I wasn't scared. I remember smiling. I was so proud that my mother felt that way, and she was willing to sacrifice me, like Abraham was willing to sacrifice Isaac.
Mm-hmm.
I was so proud of my mother when I read that. And there's something that's wrong. And let me just pause right there. So often when you're raised in these emotionally manipulative situations, you look back in your childhood and there are so many moments where your parents are proud of you, or you're receiving love or attention. And unless you go back and you recognize how messed up a lot of that was, why you were receiving attention or praise or love, you'll often find that it's not like what you thought it was. Love is so easily manipulated to be called love in the name of getting people to do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And that's a big lesson that I had to learn, is that shame and guilt is often disguised as love.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just say that. So moving forward, I was so ready to put my life on the line for the church. I would have been a martyr if I would have died in Honduras. So with all of my knowledge and all of my scriptural everything, off I went. And it was everything you would expect a third world dangerous country to be. I would have men threatening to rape me constantly.
Wow.
And I remember one time a man chasing my companion and I down the street. We got away. We found a security guard of like this enclosed place, and we got behind the gate in time. And then this man paced back and forth, waiting for us to leave.
Oh.
And we just nervously sang hymns to the security guard until this guy left. And, you know, and just all the time, or homes being broken into, or people reaching out and grabbing to touch me or my companion. And I was stupid of me at the time, probably looking back. I always kept a knife on me, and all the sisters were always like, "Oh, hermana," but it's not like I knew how to use a knife. They just would have used it to stab me, looking back. But I loved the danger. I got off on the intensity of what that mission was, and I put myself into situations, and looking back, I put my companions, my roommates, or people that aren't familiar. You're in a pair when you're a missionary, and you're not allowed to be out of sight of your companion. Anywhere you go, your companion has to go. The bathroom is the only exception. So I was often the senior companion. And so I was leading my other companion around, and I put us in situations that were dangerous because I was willing to die. Didn't ask my companion if they were willing to die. Yeah. I think more than anything on my mission, it was that cycle of emotionally manipulating myself and other people that eventually got me to the place where I just felt like nothing, and nothing could lift me up. And people always ask, well, what was the straw? What finally made you leave Mormonism? I don't think it wasn't one single thing. I had spent my whole life preparing to be, you know, the best Mormon of all time that I could be. It wasn't like it was one single thing that just broke it, but it was an entire lifetime of giving everything of myself to the church that finally broke me.
Yeah.
And when I got home from my mission, and feel free to ask any questions you want about my mission, but when I got home, I'll just say that I went to, you know, give my talks and everything, and it was supposed to be this great spiritual moment, but it wasn't for me. I stood at the pulpit looking out at everyone, just thinking, this is it.
Yeah.
I couldn't feel anything anymore, and very quickly adapted back into everything's fine and I'm so happy and I'm a missionary, especially this Mormon missionary. Let me convert you. I'll go out with the missionaries, and just, I easily adapted to that. But inside, truly, I was so broken.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's like one of those things, going to the temple, for example, that they've been preparing you to do it your entire life. They put it up on a pedestal. They make it seem like it will be the greatest experience of your entire life. It's something that also, I should mention, for women, you're only supposed to marry returned missionaries. And if you don't marry one, it's kind of like they make you feel ashamed about it. And so it kind of forces the men to want to go, because no one will even date them if they're not a returned missionary. So it's this whole badge of honor thing. And it sounds like, I wonder at what point on your mission you started to realize that this isn't everything it's all cracked up to be, or if it was, you mentioned the manipulation of people, and at what point did you just go, oh, this doesn't feel good?
Yeah, I think that the numbers played a big role in that.
The quotas?
Everyone was just a number. The quotas. You need to baptize this many people a month. Oh, you didn't baptize this many people a month? What are you doing wrong?
Yeah.
How many people, to the point where when I called my leaders, every night I would have to report, this is how many people I talked to. This is how many people I challenged to baptism. This is who we have on date for baptism. This is who we have lessons with, and yada da da da. It was all about numbers.
Yeah.
And I remember meeting people that my soul truly was connecting with, and I wanted to just help them in some way, but was told by my superiors, if they're not willing to listen about Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, move on. They'll be ready for someone else down the line, or they're too prideful, or they're not. Move on. And I internally struggled with that cognitive dissonance for a long time, of thinking, I'm supposed to be here as Christ's messenger.
Right.
And be, a representative of Jesus Christ, who is supposedly, biblically, this man who was pretty chill, honestly. Except for the Old Testament. And he's not chill. And he's just terrible. But here I am, anything but the embodiment of what Christ-like love is supposed to be. I'm judging people from the second I meet them.
Mm-hmm.
And willing to drop them at any point in time. And this continues on. You see it for the business tactic that it is, especially whenever I got up into the leadership. And also, the deeper you get into the church and more you realize that the leadership is, in the mission, like 19-year-old boys that the ego, I had worked so hard my whole life, and here I am. But at the end of the day, that 18-year-old boy still calls me on the phone, and he's my leader, and I have to do what he tells me to do.
Yikes.
That was a big hit to my ego on the mission. And it forced me to develop a very intimidating character. I think if you asked anyone in the mission who I was, other missionaries were very intimidated by me. And I was that way on purpose. And when people said they were intimidated by me, that made me very happy.
Yeah.
And taking that part of my identity forward in life has been difficult to tackle, because that is my protective shell. If I am intimidating, then I hold some sort of power, when in all honesty, the power comes from just being confident in yourself. You don't need people to think something of you.
Yeah.
I digress. That's a personal thing that I've come to realize and have been tackling lately within my own life. But it really hit on the mission. And I think just seeing the inner workings of the church, its business tactics, and all of that really is what in the end set me up to be in a position where I met the Ecologist, to finally say, okay, I will question. I will hear the other side of the story.
Yes. Enter the ecologist. We're ready.
Yes. Yes. So I got home from my mission and was supposed to go back to Utah, but my sister was pregnant and I told her I would stay for her to have the baby. So I got a summer job at an old forest preserve, and the ecologist was working there, literally as an ecologist. It's not just a code name. That is his profession. And we met and just hit it off from the start. There was just something so electric, not even in a sexual way, but just our conversation, the energy of our personalities. And eventually, you know, I'm fresh off my mission. So I thought, all right, well, I must convert him. He'll make an incredible Mormon. And that led to even deeper conversations. And his background is also in philosophy. So it led to some pretty intense conversations that I was not used to that level of intensity.
Yeah.
When talking with other people, and it just drew me towards him. And eventually I developed feelings for him. And all of it just came to this perfect moment of me being ready to let my guard down and say, I will listen to you. I really don't think it would have happened for anyone else. You know, you talk of soulmates. I don't know that I necessarily believe in soulmates, but I do truly believe that I would not have left Mormonism. I would have stayed in. I know exactly where I would be. I would have children by now. I never would have gotten my education. I would be exactly where my mother is, exactly where my sisters are. I know the life that I would be living.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, this magical moment of me coming off my mission and being in a place that was ready and meeting this man who had this background of not just this force of energy, but this philosophy, this understanding and patience. You know, he was at a point in his life where he just so happened to be, I won't speak his story for him, but there was a lot of alignment that had to happen for this. And so the ecologist in myself, that man has done more for me. Quite literally, he saved my life. I'm so grateful to him. And all of our conversations as we went throughout that summer, and then I went back to BYU and we were kind of talking long distance. And then you can catch up on this in my 18-part series as well on Instagram. And then it got to the point where my family started finding out that I was still talking to this man and that I was questioning the church. And that's when all hell broke loose.
Mm-hmm.
Because man, if there's one thing Mormons are good at, it is trying to protect that forever family, the celestial kingdom. That's their defense territory. Which I don't know if you had that experience.
No, I was pretty lucky. Most of my immediate family was already like pieced out at that point.
Nice.
So I didn't really get that extreme love bombing or judgment from my extended family. Yes, and they still do. But I think I am one of the lucky ones because I know that that's very rare. And so I'd love for you if you'd be willing to speak about some of the failed attempts, or if they were successful, some specific things that your family was doing to try and get you to come back to the Lord.
Well, I've talked previously about, especially my father, trying to assert his dominance and giving me blessings, placing his hands on my head and giving me messages from God. But really, he was just telling me, you know, this man is not for you. You need to go find another righteous man at BYU. You know this. The Lord knows this. And, you know, trying to emotionally manipulate me by telling me that it was God speaking through him saying these things. And I think that happens often with priesthood holders and priesthood blessings. And love, right? Love turns into a weapon. You are conditioned your entire life to think that love is exhibit A, everything that the Mormon church teaches you a family should be. And the second you step outside of that and you're made to feel as though you're not showing your love for your family because you're questioning the church. The church and your family are the same thing.
Yeah.
And people don't get that. People think that they can separate the church and family, but the church itself, their entire tagline is families can be together forever. And everything rests on that can.
Yep.
How can you be a forever family if you're a part of the church? And so the church undoes itself in that statement. Families can be together forever if you obey everything that we tell you to do.
Yeah.
So the second that you step outside of that and your family is now, it could be something so simple as just asking you a question, but you know that it's geared towards getting you back to church.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some people choose to struggle with this for the rest of their lives, and I don't judge them for that. But for me, why would I ever want to, and this is me talking now, right? I'll go back to the emotionally, how I felt when I was leaving, but now I could never go back. I came from that place where I sat around the table with other leaders, knowing how do we emotionally manipulate people to get them to stay. Mm-hmm. Family members, even talking about their own family. How do we help them? I have seen how deeply entrenched everything that love is hangs on the balance of your worthiness to the church in Mormonism. And so having left, you can tell me all you want, how much you still love me, how heartbroken you are, but I never trust anything you tell me again, because I know that deep down, your version of love, your version that you want me to be, is a version that no longer exists. I cannot be that anymore. And so I have chosen I'm estranged from my family. I have been for years. It's been the most freeing thing. I never would be at the point that I am now if I hadn't made that decision. So if there are people out there watching this that are struggling with that, it's different for everyone. But my personal conviction is that I will live the rest of my life authentically. And if anyone stands in my way of that, you are no longer in my life. And that is my family and anyone that is still in the Mormon church. So I hold to that now. But at the time when I was leaving, I remember one of the conversations that truly just broke me down is when the Ecologist and I flew to Colorado. I was in Utah, and we met there as kind of this safe space so that no one at BYU saw me with him or having conversations. So we go through this entire dissertation, right? Literally, the Ecologist brought a library of just duffel bags of books of, historical things and things to just talk to me, because there is that layer of Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon. But, the historical stuff, it's easy to prove dates wrong. It's easy to prove things wrong. It's easy to cut through that. But when I was lying on the hotel bed, I had been crying for hours. And I just remember looking up and I said, but what will my family say? Mm. And then the Ecologist, who had done his homework, repeated back to me the family proclamation, which is a document from the prophet and the apostles. He said, you know exactly what they'll say. And he started quoting the family proclamation. And I just lost it. I guess if there was any one moment to define when I finally broke, it was that moment. Understanding that the moment that I chose to leave Mormonism, I wasn't just leaving behind a religion. I was leaving behind my entire worldview of what a family is, of what love is,
Your purpose.
Of how to use my emotions. Yeah, all of it. That was the literal paradigm shatter for me. It's all wrapped up in the way that the church uses love to manipulate people.
Yeah.
I don't care about the history. Yeah, there's messed up stuff in like anywhere, any church, whatever you got going on. I mean, the world's a fucked up place. there's bad history everywhere. But the way that emotions are used to manipulate families, that's the problem that I have with the church.
Yeah. So because you already knew all of the history and you had found a way to make yourself okay with it, what exactly were the things that the Ecologist was presenting to you that made sense, that made you crack?
So from, like I said, from a historical perspective, I was already aware of, Joseph Smith got himself into trouble a lot and the saints got kicked out from town to town. But I was always given the version of church history where all the books were talking about how woe is them and they were victims being kicked out. But then, yes, but then you start bringing in newspaper articles from multiple sources of people around the area from town to town that did not have cross communication with each other, but all saying the same things about when Joseph Smith was on trial, what he was caught lying for, things that his family were caught lying for. I knew that Joseph Smith's family struggled to, with payments on their farm, and they often couldn't make their payments on time, and that they always fell on hard times, and that I knew about the money digging, and that Joseph Smith, his family had a stint of using, what are those rods called? Where you find
divining
water.
rods.
Divining rods. Yeah, like I knew about all that. But I was always told, manipulated to think that was just practice. The Lord had to introduce to them these magical ways of going about things so that Joseph Smith would be ready to accept, translating the Book of Mormon and the stone and the hat. Like, again, I knew about all of these things, but now you start cross-referencing actual history, actual newspapers and journal articles and things from everyone else's perspective.
Yeah, a non-faithful perspective.
It opens up your world, and that cracked me because I knew everything, but I only knew it from the Mormon Church's journal writings and articles and newspapers. So historically, if you take this big wide window view and you don't just study church history, you study world history looking into the Mormon lens, that's when you really see how messed up it all was. And that was something I was not prepared for in the historical sense.
That makes sense. That was me too. I hadn't really known much about the church history aside from what they teach in Sunday school. But like you said, it's a very, very skewed perspective. And that's why every now and then I'll get a comment from an active Mormon who's like, you clearly know nothing about the church. Everything you're saying is wrong. And then I'll give them actual church resources like from their own church website and be like, here you go. Because the church just omits and lies on purpose, and they skew it on purpose because they know how it sounds, and no one would be okay with it if they knew the whole story. So I totally get that perspective, and I love your husband for doing that.
Me too.
I mean, the patience that it must have taken. I mean, flying there, and then he drove you from Colorado back to Utah, and it's just the levels that he was willing to go is so amazing. And my heart goes out to him, and I want to meet him and give him a hug.
You should. Yeah. And he would actually be a great interview for you, because I think he would have a different perspective to give you than just talking to someone who was in a high demand religion. Talking to someone that got someone out is a whole different perspective. Because even this weekend, there are still struggles. We are 5 years into our relationship, and there are still things that he's just like, babe, I'm just going to say this again. You were born in a cult. What you're saying right now, what you're feeling, like put it into this perspective. And I cannot give enough credit to the patience of that man, because I've made so many strides and worked so hard. And I have beautiful people that are like, well, you did that. That's all you. And I'm like, thank you. But oh my God, I would not have done it at the speed of which I'm doing it if it was not for the patience of this man. I have just nothing but thankfulness to him. And I will approach him if he would like to do an interview with you at some point in time.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you want to talk about as far as you leaving?
Well, the story is so easy to tell within a succinct amount of time. It was years, guys. I still get lots of comments on my Instagram of people not realizing that it took years to get to where I am. And whatever part of your journey that you're at, don't judge yourself or think that you need to be anywhere. Just keep moving forward. Because I left BYU. I went to Arizona. I lived there, still talking to the ecologist, still dealing with my family telling me all sorts of things like, don't you feel the darkness inside of you? Asking me if I was suicidal because I was leaving. Letters from, I presented a letter that my aunt wrote me on my Instagram and TikTok. It was an onslaught that went on for the next couple of years before I finally made the steps to block certain family members, not let certain family members talk to me, and eventually become completely estranged from my family.
Yeah.
The knocks on the door, people coming up and just, hi, oh, well, you babysat my kids. I just love you. I just want to make sure you're okay. And the church doesn't have to define our relationship. Yes, it does.
Interesting.
It always will define our relationship. And that was something that I had to wrap my head around that took at least 2 years to finally get through. Yeah, so that's not the end of the story. It goes on and on, over and over again, having to face my past and face those emotional manipulations and face conditional love until I was able to finally recognize it for what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's all I really want to make sure that I drive home to listeners.
And we were going to read that letter from your aunt. I think we're running out of time, but if you're willing, I would love to go live and maybe we could read it live and people can see it in real time and we can discuss it and talk about it. And also have you share more of your music, because I definitely want everyone to hear that and how it's shaped you into who you are now.
Yes, definitely. The music portion of this is everything to me because, like I said earlier on in this interview, the music is where I was finally able to break through to myself. Mm-hmm. That I was perfectly content to be this chameleon of being what anyone needed me to be at any point in time. But the music is where I'm able to break through to myself. And so often my deepest messages are written in the lyrics. I'm a lyrical person, but the album that I have coming out is my Exodus story, told from an emotional perspective, and I can't wait to release that to the world. It's been the work of my life for the last 5 years, getting this album together, and I'll be on tour on the Testimony tour out in Utah, Colorado, Idaho, and I'll be presenting this album that has never been heard before. And I truly think everything that I've said in this podcast, it comes down to an hour-long, just emotionally beautiful roller coaster of triumph and healing. I really do think that it will help heal people.
Yeah, I agree. And I can't wait to hear all of that music. And that tour is coming up soon.
Yes, August 11th, we'll be in Denver, Colorado. And then August 12th, we are in Salt Lake City. I'm also bringing my film crew out with me. So we'll be shooting a music video and doing some other fun stuff. And then I have a show in Idaho on August 19th. You can go to my website, irenesentropy.com, or just look me up on Instagram, TikTok, and yeah, the links are all there.
Yes. We'll put all the links in the description too, so people can find it.
Awesome. Oh, just that for others to be aware, I am filming the entire tour. That this is a part of a documentary series really about my life. And I'm hoping to include testimonies of other people. That's why it's called the Testimony Tour.
Yes.
I'm hoping to collect other people's experiences to just show that, you know, this album and this music, it's not mine anymore. It's collectively our story. And I want other people to relate to it. I don't want it to just, you know, be mine. So that is happening if people want to participate.
That is so beautiful. It's so empowering too. And also, the sheer number of ex-Mormons is astounding. The church claims that they have like 16.6 million members. They have like 4 million active members. That's a lot of ex-Mos out there.
Yeah.
And not even that, like Jehovah's Witnesses and Scientologists. And I mean, everyone that we interview on the show, they can all relate to each other in some big underlying way. It's all the guilt and the shame and the controlling and the manipulation. And so we all get it. And I just love that you're doing that and you're sharing that with the world. And you're also giving people a voice, because that's something that people often find through music when they listen to lyrics and they realize those are the words they've been trying to say, but they didn't know how to say it. And so it's such a healing thing for people to be able to listen to a song, feel the spirit in their own way, and recognize that it's themselves. It's, you know, their own emotions. It's taking back that sovereignty, that power, the individuality, and recognizing that you are the powerful one and not this outside source. So cool.
Yes. Thank you. That's everything I stand for. That is literally the history and the identity of Irene, myself. The name coming from this patriarchal ceremony that was nothing but obedience to what other people told me I had to be.
Yeah.
Blossoming into this name that now represents not just music, but a brand of empowerment for other women, other people. I want to clearly make the statement that while people look at me as an ex-Mormon, the message of Irene's Entropy goes so much deeper than that, because when you leave, most people that leave high demand religions eventually are like, I'll leave it alone. I don't even need to touch it anymore. It's fine. And you walk away. But I think many times you walk away not knowing the baggage that you're taking with inside of you. Mm-hmm. You might leave behind certain habits and people and set boundaries, but the real trauma is inside of us. And sometimes we neglect that until years and years later.
Yep.
And the goal of Irene's Entropy is to try to start that conversation with people. Not necessarily to say, well, you're broken or you're right. It's more of saying, hi, let's be aware of the trauma and let's not focus on any of the religious aspects, but let's be aware of it and talk about it. And for me, use music to perhaps help you be more aware of that inside of yourself so that there can be healing.
Yes, so good. That's the consciousness. It's the awareness. It's just understanding that there are things that have been programmed into you that you may not know are there until you just sit with yourself and you have that awareness. And I love that you said it's not to say that you are broken. Absolutely not. There are things that are probably running your life that you're not necessarily aware of, just like the aha moment I had today with you. It's just about rediscovering yourself. It's about finding out what you want, not what this external entity, this religion, this person, this idol, this God, whoever you deified. It's what you want and how you want to perceive things. So good. Oh my gosh, we could talk for hours, perfect.
Girl. Well, I was just going to say to end, you always do the listen Linda thing, right?
Yeah, Linda listen. Give me your Linda listen.
Yeah. So coming off of what you just said, which is so perfect, My Linda, listen, I'm going to paraphrase here, but Linda, listen up. You don't need permission from anyone to live your life authentically.
Yes.
Done.
Oh, so good.
Because that's what it comes down to, is that you don't need permission to do that. You just need to believe in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much, Shelise. You're an incredible host.
Thank you. It's just been so much fun. You're really easy to talk to, and we could just get into the weeds. I love just really dissecting all of those little things, the stuff that we don't generally think about as humans as we go about our busy lives. And this is always some sort of therapy for me too. So I appreciate you coming on and being willing to share your story and being vulnerable. I definitely want to do a live with you at some point. So guys, keep your eye out for that. Hit the bell if you want to be notified when we go live. And is there any final thoughts that you have before we go?
Just that I am not on YouTube much. I do have a music video coming out, but if your subscribers would like to also subscribe to my channel, I'm very new to YouTube.
Okay.
So go show some love.
Yeah, we'll put all the links down below so you guys can find Irene, her music, and we'll definitely see more of her. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this episode, please like it and comment some words of encouragement. And just thank you for being here. If you want to support the podcast on a further level, you can join my Patreon at patreon.com/cults2consciousness. My newest patrons, Gemma and Paul, thank you so much for your support. And if you guys like this episode, I will put 2 right here that you'll want to check out. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.